Hello, everyone, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Art Platform India, TAP as we call it, and to our TAP Talks. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we have a very insightful and exciting talk ahead of us. Unfortunately, Sharan Apparao, the TAP India founder, won't be able to join us today due to some circumstances. Just a quick introduction about TAP India. TAP India is a collective platform that brings together galleries from around the country to support, collaborate, and generate more visibility. We explore newer markets and open private doors to conversations through talks like the one we are about to begin. We wanted to create a platform for one on one candid talks between people from the industry talking about experience, trends, and hopefully address some questions you may already have about the art world. Let me introduce to you Anna Salgado. She is a strong advocate of the arts as a vehicle to promote emotional health, and she uses it as a platform for creative self expression. Working with community and corporate partners, she develops and facilitates programs to encourage engagement in the arts for mental well being. She is a recipient of the 2020 Toastmasters Community and Leadership Award and the 2019 Mississauga Arts Council Arts for Health Award, and she is a visual artist and a graduate of fine arts. Anna genuinely believes that it is through the arts we tap into the true spirit of our human experience. So, over to Anna.
Thank you, Anya. Before we go ahead, please know the session is being recorded. If you do not wish to be in the recording, please turn off your cameras. The session is an hour, 45 minutes for the discussion and 10 minutes for question and answers. I encourage you to type your questions into the chat box or the Q&A if Rusti's managed to figure it out. These will be read during the Q&A session at the end. For questions we are unable to get to, we will address them and send them out as an email if you have registered your email with TAP India. I also request everyone to mute your audio as well as your cell phones to avoid any background sounds. So, huge welcome, as we do it in the dance classes, a huge warm welcome across the continents to all who have taken time out on a Saturday to participate in this very relevant discussion. I give God thanks for this session. Sharan Apparao, founder of TAP, and we go back a long way. We were actually in university together. We are both very passionate about the arts. And over the past year, our common goals sort of converged to bring these panel discussions to you as a means of creating greater awareness while promoting understanding on mental health and the therapeutic effect of engagement in the arts. Now more than ever, we need to address the stigma and fear associated with words like dementia and Alzheimer's. So, as Anya rightly said, I am Anna Salgado, founder of Artisan Momentum, an organization committed to promoting mental wellness through the arts. It is my privilege and honor to introduce our distinguished panelists, Dr. Preetika Chari, Dr. Pia Contos, and Keith Francis. Today's topic is one that is much talked about in our search to understand and support loved ones living with dementia. Over the next 45 minutes, we hope to cover this from a scientific perspective while touching on the impact of creativity in the care of dementia patients and caregivers. Our panelists will definitely challenge our way of thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to the panelists. Dr. Preetika Chari is the first and only lady in India to be qualified both as neurophysician and neurosurgeon. Among her many awards and accolades are the Humanitarian Award from the Indian Red Cross, the Sri Ratna Award from the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan for constructive contribution to the nation in the field of neurosciences. Dr. Preetika Chari is currently a neurologist with Kaveri Hospital in Chennai and Senior Consultant at the Dementia Foundation, Chennai. But for me, Dr. Preetika Chari is like a familiar song from the past. I wondered why her name resonated when Gayatri, who heads the Dementia Foundation in Chennai, connected us. In my chat with my sister, she reminded me that it was Dr. Preetika who operated and attended to our mother when she had a stroke. She had a stroke. I never had the opportunity, Dr. Preetika, to thank you then for saving her life. And so I thank you now. Honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Next, we have Dr. Pia Contos. Dr. Pia is senior scientist. Can we change the slide, please? Thank you. Dr. Pia Contos is senior scientist at the Kite Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, University Health Network. She is professor at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health, University of Toronto. I have talked to Dr. Pia on and off on several occasions, and her deep passion in the care for people living with dementia is nothing short of awe-inspiring. To quote Dr. Contos, in all of my work, I am motivated by a very deep concern about stigma surrounding dementia and how it promotes social exclusion, depriving people with dementia of their dignity, mitigating their participation in activities of social life. Dr. Contos strongly advocates engagement with the arts. She is a founding member of Reimagining Dementia, a creative coalition for justice. But I will let all of that unfold in the discussion. And next we have Keith Francis. Can you change the slide, please? Thank you. Keith is the proverbial icing on the cake. Keith is Associate and Senior Director, Experience Outcomes, Forge Media and Design. I have known Keith for a few years now. And honestly, when I listen to Keith talk, it is like listening to Mozart or Beethoven. I have known very few people in my life who can make conversation and dialogue sound like a symphony. Keith holds a master's degree in the interdisciplinary studies from York University. His thesis, Merging Narrative Psychology, Spatial Phenomenology, and Cognitive Factors to Conceptualize the Narratives of Persons Living with Dementia, was presented at the Congress of the International Academy of Law and Mental Health in Vienna. He is passionate about the narrative. Keith is also a member of the Brain Exchange Design and Dementia Corp. Okay, so with all that being said, let's start. I would like to reiterate that while a question is addressed to a specific panelist, this is an open forum for free exchange of ideas and thoughts. My first question is to you, Dr. Preetika. From a scientific perspective, dementia is a word that has been around for a long time, and there are still a lot of questions and confusion associated with it. For example, is it the same as Alzheimer's? Is it a disease with a specific cause, or is it a specific illness? How would you explain dementia in simple terms to a layperson like me? Unmute. The famous line of the 2021 is, "You're on mute."
Dementia actually means removing mentation. So that is how the name dementia is there for when we lose cognitive function in various disorders. Now, dementia is only a generic term. There are very many varieties of dementia, and there are some treatable dementias also. So when a doctor sees a patient with symptoms of dementia, the first thing we do is look for treatable causes. Now, the treatable causes, the commonest treatable cause is thyroid dysfunction. It's a very easily treatable cause, and it's very important that we diagnose and pick this up, because the prognosis is absolutely wonderful. Like that, we have certain metabolic conditions and deficiency syndromes, which can also lead to dementia. But that's not the dementia we're talking about today. What we're talking about is a huge umbrella. And one of the conditions there is Alzheimer's disease. Now, Alzheimer's disease is a genetic disorder. It is twice as common in women as it is in men. It is associated with advanced age. It can come to other members of the family. And if you look at all the dementias, about 60% of dementias would be Alzheimer's dementia. We have another category, about 20%, called vascular dementia, which can happen after a stroke or due to various deficiencies in the blood circulation. You can have a combination of both vascular dementia with Alzheimer's dementia, because people who've had a stroke, if they have the gene for Alzheimer's, they're more prone to manifest the findings of Alzheimer's quicker. Then we have some more specific dementias associated with Parkinsonism. There is a condition called Lewy body disease. These are all specific syndromes associated with other degenerative conditions of the brain. A specific type of dementia is frontotemporal dementia, and the frontal part and the temporal part of the brain are atrophied specifically in this, and it does have a significance to our discussion today, which I will point out later. So broadly speaking, these are the types of dementia, and these are the incidences in which they occur.
Okay, so really what I did want to throw in here is that, our brain is really swimming in neurochemicals like, dopamine, serotonin, and all this affects our behavior, as our brain ages, or, all these chemicals are in our brain. Do you believe that activities like can impact the neurochemistry of our brain and can unlock the secret of living a long and healthy life? Surely it has an impact on the way we live. I mean, please, everyone, Dr. Contos, please feel free to jump in here. And, I just want to move this conversation from dementia, how our brain, how the chemicals in our brain can, activities can impact how we move forward in life. So for that, I'm just going to throw this open to Dr. Pia. Can I call you Pia? I feel very odd calling you Pia. Because I've called you Pia all along, and now suddenly I'm calling you Dr. Pia. So Pia, the impact of creativity, you do a lot of work in this field, tremendous amount of work surrounding the impact of art, including music, dance, drama, and film. Can you share some of your thoughts on this and how it supports and helps people with dementia? I'm especially interested in your thoughts on art as a therapeutic tool to manage behavior and its contribution to the stigma associated with dementia. I think that's one of your passions.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. Thanks for your question, Anna.
Thank you, Kritika. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
So our arts-based programs such as music and visual arts, dance, and drama are being adopted in dementia care more and more. And these programs have been shown to have very positive clinical outcomes, including improvements in neuropsychiatric symptoms, emotional states, cognition, orientation, decreases in verbal and physical aggression and anxiety. And given these positive outcomes and the rapidly growing field of arts in healthcare that integrates the arts into medical settings, opportunities to participate in the arts is now deemed critical. in dementia care. However, in dementia care settings, the arts have been adopted for the very narrow purpose of managing challenging, behaviors and to achieve targeted clinical outcomes. They really are reduced to a therapeutic tool. And this is despite the powerful ways that the arts more broadly support life enrichment, like empowerment, communication, and meaningful creative expression, communal spirit, pleasurable experience, sociability. These are all typically considered side benefits and not the primary intention of implementing arts programs.
Right.
I've found in my own research on dance, music, and improvisational play that people living with dementia, even in advanced stages where cognitive memory is severely impaired, they can be highly creative, often with only embodied self-expression or nonsensical speech. People living with dementia, they can initiate, they can modify, they can co-construct really exquisite moments of engagement through song, dance, humor. So I think it's all the more egregious then that the arts are only valued as a therapeutic rather than being central to life enrichment. I recall vividly an experience that I observed in a study that I did of a long-term care home that I think really powerfully illustrates this. There was a woman who loved to sing during her meals, and the staff would always ask her to stop singing and to finish her meal so that they could clear and then set the table for the next meal. And it was always difficult for me to observe this since her singing brought her and the other residents in the dining room such delight. There was also an absurdity to it, given that just after the meal, she would be taken to music therapy. So this confines engagement with song to song and music to, activity times, rather than allowing it to more spontaneously flourish in everyday life. There are so many other similar observations of mine that really left me feeling very deeply troubled about what this denies for people living with dementia. And it also triggered in me a very deep commitment to ensuring that people living with dementia are given equal opportunities to participate in life, including creative pursuits. So participatory arts is really an important focus of my work.
Right. Please, Dr. Preetika, go ahead.
I'd like you to refer you to an article in Archives of Neurology 2004, where the article is titled "Art in the Context of Dementia Provides a Unique Window into the Cognitive Processes of Various Brain Regions and an Opportunity for Rehabilitation." So like you said, it's not just part of life enrichment. It has a rehabilitative role as well.
Right. So from your point of view, Dr. Preetika, from what Pia has just said, do you believe that these activities can, what is the word, can rebuild the brain? Can the brain be rebuilt through these activities? I mean, I absolutely have no scientific awareness of how dementia affects our brain, but I mean, I know that, and I know I'm jumping here to neuroplasticity. Is this a form of therapy that can rebuild the brain cells?
See, till the advent of technology and the fMRI and all the PET scans and all that, which enabled us to study the brain as it is doing a function, we couldn't do that before. So we've known more about the brain after the advent of technology than we knew for the last 150 years. And one thing is, we thought that neuroplasticity is a function only of the developing brain. But we know now that neuroplasticity can occur right till the day we die. And there are different types of neuroplasticity. And here it is experiential and environmental enrichment, which is causing the neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is, if you use it, if you don't use it, you lose it. That sums up neuroplasticity. So when you give them therapeutic interventions in whatever form, you're using those components of the brain. And so you're actually triggering neuroplasticity. And while there is a lot of aging changes which happen in Alzheimer's, there is a collection of things called amyloid and neurofibrillary tangles. And this messes up the brain and makes the neuron die and non-functional. So in spite of that, there are a lot of surviving good cells still around, which you tap into through neuroplasticity, through triggering them to function better. And actually, new nerve cell growth can also occur. Neurogenesis can occur. How much that neurogenesis can make up for the loss of cells is something we're not sure of.
Right.
But it may be relevant to talk about what is called as the American nun study at this juncture. There was a big research study done in the convent in Notre Dame. And there, the nuns, everything was sort of, they were a good group because their lifestyle was the same, their food was the same, their activities were the same. And an interesting fact there was that many of those nuns lived beyond 80. Some of them lived even up to 110. And they lived pretty well. They were pretty healthy. And they did not have too much of any other illness. In those who developed Alzheimer's, they found all these nuns donated their brains to research. So an autopsy was done every time any of the nuns died, the brain was studied. And they found many brains which showed changes of Alzheimer's, which did not manifest in life.
Mm.
So that, what are we talking about? So that's neuroplasticity. And these nuns were very, very physically active, mentally active. They used to play board games. They used to, play games. They used to have a same kind of diet. And they were a happy lot. So positive life, and many of them were highly educated. So early education actually reduces your risk for Alzheimer's in late life. But having said that, we've seen many professors, etc., break down. But it's just one of the research points. So neuroplasticity is something we know about. We know it exists. We haven't fully understood it, and we have not fully understood how it plays a role in Alzheimer's. So do what we can when we can with what we've got. I don't think we should just give up.
Right.
And we have seen clinically changes seen. And when we found also in frontotemporal dementia, I said I'll mention something relevant to our discussion. Some people with frontotemporal dementia start manifesting tremendous artistic ability after the dementia sets in, which they never had before. It's as if another part of the brain has taken over and given an outlet to the brain to express itself. And they come out, these are big papers that we read in our neuro conferences, and you must see those paintings.
Yeah.
They're fantastic, beautiful. But a person with Alzheimer's, because it's a visual process, like language requires a different process, this is a visual process. And there's a ventral stream, dorsal stream, all that. But what happens in Alzheimer's is they can produce color, they sometimes are not able to produce shape. The visuospatial skills may get impaired.
Right. So, I just want to come back to Pia's point about what you noticed at that cafe when the lady was singing and, the others kind of joined in. Is this what you would call relationship building, relational caring, that promotes and makes a person living with dementia thrive instead of drawing back and feeling that they are not part of a community? I mean, it sort of creates and corrals them together and builds them up as individuals, right?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think the arts very much help to forge relationships. And I think that's a really nice example. But there are so many other examples where, the arts support communication, sociability, intersubjectivity. Yes, absolutely. I think, and I think that there's a concept. I mean, the very notion of creativity. There's a relational approach to even understanding creativity. So understanding that one's creativity doesn't reside in the individual, but actually resides in the context of those relationships.
Right, right.
That improves social engagement.
yes,
Definitely improves
yes.
social engagement.
I mean,
Yes,
it
absolutely.
really,
And in singing, they seem to remember the words because remote memory is intact. So
yeah,
you could make them sing all the old songs and they'll have melody and memory will be retained.
right,
And it becomes a communal activity.
yes.
I think, given the importance of music and song, some colleagues and I co-produced a film called Music is Life. And it is precisely this. It conveys the importance of musical engagement for people living with dementia, the many ways that it supports connections between people, it enhances relationships, it enriches lives. I really do think it's an important film because I think it challenges dominant assumptions that with dementia, there is only loss. I think that what we're seeing with the arts is that there is this extraordinary ability, to pursue meaningful relationships and to be creative and to engage in meaningful activities. And I think the film also challenges the art for therapy culture that I was mentioning before. We've seen in our research and you see in the film so many different examples of imaginative and humorous and playful and moving expressions through musical engagement. The ability to sing despite impaired speech, the ability to dance despite impaired movement, the ability to play an instrument despite impaired memory. And these abilities have to be nurtured in all aspects of life. Otherwise, I really do think that we're falling short of fully supporting the humanity of people living with dementia.
The
Right.
daughter of another patient with dementia brought out a book saying, I remember better when I paint, which is what her mother used to say. And they've created a foundation, and definitely every time she painted, she would almost behave near normal.
Yeah, but it's almost that the term normal, like in our current situation, we have moved from a normal to a new normal. So really, when a person is living with dementia, that is their normal. I mean, and it's how do we, as caregivers, as people who are observing someone whose lifestyle or whose ability to absorb, and they ask the same questions over and over, how do we how can we care for them with compassion without uh, renegating them, or is that even the word, putting them in a box, and sort of uh, believing that their life is almost come to a close because they have changed, their behavior has changed from who they were. I mean, they're still the same person, right? Like, and we should be able to treat them as such, right? And I think this Keith has been very quiet and not contributed. I know you're
Well,
waiting for my question for you.
I'm just waiting for my moment. But there's been some incredible thoughts and observations towards dementia and persons living with dementia. And I think from my perspective, I do believe that this is holistic for sure. There is a scientific perspective to an enlightenment towards how we view persons living with dementia. There's a cultural and an artistic perspective to how we view persons living with dementia. But I also think, and especially in Canada, where we definitely have a crisis as it relates to the perspective of the built environment, and specific to that, long-term care homes. So we have to sort of look at all of these things holistically. Winston Churchill has a famous saying, and I'm sure he wasn't really talking about dementia homes at this particular time, but I think the statement has merit, and it says that we shape our buildings, therefore they shape us. And I think there's a reciprocal exchange, as with art, as the built environment has an effect on persons living with dementia. In some cases, depending on two contrasts of perspectives. One is if the design of world and space and place is designed from the arid intellect, where they are mathematical conventions applied to institutions of care without a living perspective to it, then these persons placed within these environments, sort of devoid of meaning and substance, become those environments. Their personhood and identity are stripped. If, from another perspective, it's looked upon as matters of the heart, then we start to take into consideration the wonderful things that we are talking about, that Pia has just talked about, which is the emotional perspectives, personhood, identity, and how it relates to the perspective of space and place. And most importantly, from a co-design perspective, is actually having the voices that it concerns part of the co-design approach. Too many times, the voices that it concerns as it relates to the design of space and place, these voices and their narratives are not part of the design of world. And then you get these adjunctive perspectives of long-term care homes. And I do have to go to a statement, if you would allow me. I was a struggling student trying to understand the world from an interdisciplinary perspective and looking at the perspectives of the built environment, looking at persons living with dementia and looking at narrative. And I came across a statement by a French philosopher, an anthropologist and sociologist, Bruno Latour. And he said, matters of fact are rarely matters of concern. And that was profound to me, because I think if you look at matters of fact as it relates to the built environment or institutions of care, or even architecture, architecture can produce beautiful mediums as it relates to form and function. And we experience these mediums in our day-to-day life. But as a matter of concern, architecture can be a seeing art instead of a feeling one. We can be, as applied practitioners, preoccupied with the ocular centricity of our art, and we forget about the felt experience. And I think that that is really important. If you look at, for example, objects, and you look at a staircase, for instance, yes, for persons that are able-bodied, it really helps us, and it's ubiquitous in its use and how we get around in the world to challenge these vertical schemas. But what happens if you're not able? What happens if you have cognitive disabilities, and viewing a staircase as being a barrier to transcendental perspectives and the right of ascension? These things are very important. And if I sort of bring this thought to dementia and persons living with dementia, it is also the same. Matters of fact, yes, dementia is a degenerative disease, but it doesn't mean that the persons that are suffering from dementia should be bound by that condition or bound to a tragedy discourse. So oftentimes the matter of concern for us is that there's a lack of voice. There's a lack of narrative. When persons are diagnosed, when they become a patient, their personhood is often removed, and there's a crisis of characterization for those individuals. There's also a lack of citizenry as well. So they've removed from and placed within these environments. And I think that that is also very concerning as well. So to sum it up, I think that the built environment, as much as the scientific perspectives of persons living with dementia, is incredibly important from a holistic standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I do want you to, I want to bring that thought about citizenship back to thank you, Keith. That was really very profound. And I did watch one of your videos where you share, uh, you talk about Belmont House and the research that you did over there with the patients. And you talk about, the space and how important it is for us to look at the space that we place people, space and place, really, where dementia patients are open to or living in. It has a huge impact in their life, right? So I want to keep that thought on the back burner, but I want to talk about dementia patients and citizenship. That is something that I know Pia is very passionate about, and I want you to talk a little bit about that, Pia. And please, Dr. Preetika, please feel free to jump in. Keith, please feel free to jump in. And I want to engage in this aspect of the talk in a little in depth, because I want our viewers to look at that aspect of dementia, people suffering from dementia, and the caregivers, because it definitely affects the caregivers and their perspective of dealing with family members who are suffering from this, right? So, Pia, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so I'm not exactly sure what you want me to say about citizenship, but I think that it does, and maybe just to pick up on the theme that that Keith was addressing, which is the relationship between individuals living with dementia and place and space. We think about relationships only between people, but there are important relationships between people and place, people and the state and its institutions. And I think this is where citizenship comes in. People living with dementia are stripped of their citizenship rights. And I guess what I want to highlight here, in just picking up on something that Keith mentioned, is that we don't really consider the importance of these relationships enough. And I think that we assume that that cognitive decline is only a function of neuropathology. But I think that there is enough research out there to demonstrate the importance of how people living with dementia are treated, and how that can either support people to live well with dementia, or to contribute to that downward decline. So I think what Keith was talking about is extremely important, because the built environment and the opportunities that presents for engagement is extremely important. I'm thinking about here, and I think this comes back to the discussion too about neuroplasticity. I'm thinking about Tom Kitwood's model of the very process of dementia. He argued that this pivots on a dialectical interplay between neurological and sociocultural and socio-psychological factors. So, and he placed a lot of emphasis on the latter, which can actually deprive a neurologically impaired individual of their self. And yet we assume that the loss of self is only a function of cognitive decline. So I think his model is really important here, because I think if we think about self as residing both in the structural configuration of the brain and also in the social nexus, you can see then the importance of the environment and relationships in supporting that person, to live well with that decline. So I think, if I were to tie this back to citizenship, I think that we need to be much more attentive to the relationships with people, with place, with institutions, the state. We have a moral imperative to support people through policies, and practices to thrive and not just to survive.
I also think, if I can relay an observation, a beautiful observation, because I actually to give back to the community that, and yes, you're right, Belmont House was one of the very few long-term care homes that allowed me to conduct my research there. I actually approached 7 to 8 research facilities or long-term care homes, and a lot of them said no. So I really do owe Belmont a lot. But one of the things that's really interesting about Belmont House is that they have a garden that is central within the space. It is smack dab in the middle. So from the access points from window to accessibility to that garden space is wonderful. It's almost 360 degrees. And one of the things that I noticed is when I was volunteering and helping persons with dementia, especially at mealtime, because mealtime is incredibly important to make sure that they eat well. Their the perspectives of how I saw those individuals was one where they weren't really engaged with the environment around them. They were simply just going through sort of their movements to sort of eat, and we would basically assist them. Then I would place them into the wheelchair and wheel them into the garden space, and I just saw a complete transformation. Their blink rate changed, their disposition changed completely. Instead of being inward, they started to go outwards. They would actually start to reach for flowers. And the flowers, in one case in our research, somebody said that flowers are like friends. So the relationship is not just about the built environment, it's also about these biophilic perspectives about the built environment, the living things that would relate to the biophysiology of the individuals. And when she said flowers are like friends for somebody that is suffering from mid stages of dementia, I thought that was incredibly profound. So they anthropomorphize objects and living things, and that basically supplements loss. And so that's something that's really, really important as well.
Maybe I can share another example, Keith, that I think further illustrates the importance of these relationships. I did an ethnographic study in it.
Sorry, I lost connectivity for a while.
I wondered what happened. Is it my screen?
I just dropped out of the session.
Are you in now? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Sorry about that. Sorry, Pia. Please go ahead.
That's okay. I just wanted to share another example where there was a male resident in this long-term care home who had lost the ability to speak coherently. This is I mentioned this is an Orthodox Jewish facility, and so on the high holidays, it was that the residents would be brought to the synagogue that was in this long-term care home. And on this particular high holiday, which was Simchat Torah, the celebration of the Torah, all of the male congregants were invited up to the bima to say a prayer. And it was a high honor. And I remember I saw him, this resident in particular, lining up to go and say the prayer. And I remember feeling terribly anxious because I knew from my interactions with him that he couldn't put a sentence together. So I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, when they called his name, his usual, shuffle became like his whole, you talked, Keith, about one's disposition changing, his whole body changed. He stood upright with confidence and pride. He walked up to the bima and he said the prayer with absolute proficiency. And what struck me about this observation is that had I asked him to say the prayer if he was in his room, he would not have been able to do that. There was something about the orchestration of the event, the synagogue, the touch of the Torah, the smell of the sanctuary, the candles, the presence of the other congregants and the rabbi. This orchestration triggered, elicited in him the memory of the prayer. So I totally agree that these relationships are extremely important, and rather than assuming that there's just loss, I think that these should inspire us all to find ways to support these memories.
something which ties all this together. In Japan, as early as some 20 years ago, they had a very interesting model of dementia care homes. They would have a kind of a qualified caregiver, who could do basic nursing kind of jobs as well, who would be in charge of a 6 or 7 bedroom home. And each patient had their own bedroom. And they would participate in the maintenance of the home, housework, everything. And they found that those who stayed in such facilities compared to staying in a care home in the traditional sense, what Keith was saying, in the sterile atmosphere kind of homes, these people did far better. Their deterioration was slower, and they were much more functional for much longer. And relatives were allowed to visit as if they were visiting somebody at home. And this entire atmosphere supports exactly what Keith is saying. They did not feel that they were in a medical or a quasi-medical or a care home kind of feeling. They felt they were at home. And there was a lot of social engagement. They did things together. They would, for instance, sit and prepare the meal together, help them prepare the meal. They didn't have any primary responsibilities, but they would participate in everything, making the bed, cleaning the place, everything. And I think that model is an excellent model to imitate. I know it's tough. It's much more expensive and it's tough. And it did not have more than 6 or 8 people in a particular facility.
Can I just go back?
Community, right? Community and
Exactly.
And not treating anyone differently.
They felt they were living in a single home with relatives and family and that kind of atmosphere.
Can I just go back to something that Pia was saying about communication? Because I think this, I think this is such an important point to make here. Because yes, with the dementia condition, there is a loss of voice, but not just from a restrictive perspective, which we can talk about later in terms of participation, which is often missed, but it's just a part of the condition itself that communication, verbal communication, is really difficult. So I had a moment, and we all go through these constitutional changes, things, an event or a moment that you go through. Pia, you talked about it, Dr. Prathika, you talked about these moments that changes your constitution about how you see the world and the design of world. And I went through one. I asked, we were doing research with persons living with dementia. We actually videotaped, we had permission to videotape these sessions. And I remember asking one of the individuals about where they came from, their home. And it was just remarkable because she had really, really difficult time sort of communicating verbally. But what she did when I asked her about her home and where she came from, she did this. And then she said, I came from a place where there were trees overhead. And she basically used this to communicate trees overhead. And that was so profound to me because it said that there is a holistic nature to this communication. And I was actually part of the neuroscience team that would tour the different facilities. And one of the things in their evaluation processes is that there was no nonverbal scale reference towards communication. And so how would you know, how you would, this important trees overhead perspective would be completely missed in terms of her view of what was important to her and the journey narrative that she actually went through, and potentially the view that she had to a garden space, or the fact that the room should be orientated instead of a parking lot, which might cause maladaptive behaviors. It should be orientated to a forest, because that in itself is transcendental to a particular perspective of her personhood and her being. So that's why communication is incredibly important in that way.
Yeah, but we all know that in communication, the verbal communication is only a small part. See, my PhD is in speech and language disorders. So it's a very small part of total communication. the non-verbal element, body language, and the tone of voice play a much more important role than the actual words that are said. So we encourage in our patients with Alzheimer's, we encourage a lot of gestural communication. And they're able to follow what we are instructing them. They're able to, because the mirror neurons come into play. They imitate you. And so you can communicate using that mirror neuron network.
Yeah, I guess my point, I guess my point, Dr. Pratika, is that you're absolutely right. I think both of these perspectives, verbal and nonverbal, are most important. But in the design of world, or in the design, or in the perspective of a co-design approach, if these things are not considered, and these
True.
narratives are considered, then how is it going to be part of the, in the case that is most important to me, the built environment? If the
Right.
narrative, yeah, how is that going to be communicated? Biographies have so much to do with the spirit and sense of place. And if these biographies are missed and not taken into consideration from a nonverbal and verbal perspective, what is the environment going to look like in that case, right?
True.
And what are relationships going to look like? So you've
Right.
reminded me, Keith, of another example where there was a woman who had lost the ability to speak entirely. And every time they would bring her to the dining table and they would secure a bib around her neck, she would spend 10 minutes struggling, to pull a string of pearls from beneath the bib and to place them on top of the bib so that everyone at the table could admire them. And so I think that, yes, it's terribly important to consider embodied self-expression in design, but also in terms of relationships and how we support self. So I've written a lot about the importance of bodily movements and gestures for selfhood that are not valorized, because I think that we don't attend to these enough, and we attend much more to verbal forms of expression. And in the context of dementia, where the body becomes the primary means of connection to the world, we need to be attending to this much more, as you say, in design, and also in terms of how we are supporting the person through relationships and through opportunities to engage in activities. I think that's why the arts are so important, because they so powerfully support nonverbal communication and affect in ways that other activities don't. And so we need to be supporting these much more than we are.
Well said, and well said. And, this is, it's almost come a full circle, and you sort of wrapped it up so beautifully, Pia, because we have almost, at 9:58, it's almost 2 minutes to 10 a.m. over here. And I do want to give the participants, the audience, a chance to ask questions, and I can't see any of the questions over here. So I don't know if the TAP India team have received questions in the Q&A, which we would like to ask the panelists. Are there any questions there, Anya?
We're just looking into it.
Okay, but if you want to just unmute yourself, if anyone has questions in the audience, and please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any of the panelists a question, if you would care to. Anyone?
I do see, Anna, that there was a question about the link to the film that I mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if
I did see that. That was from Susan. I have a lot of folks here who are from the arts world here in Mississauga. Susan, Jasmine, we are all a very tight-knit community of artists here. And I know that Susan is the one. So Susan, we will share that with you. I think, Pia, did you send that link?
I did. I might be able to
You can
I'll look
put it
for
in.
it as you're talking. I'll look for it and see if I can put it in the chat. But I can certainly provide that. It's free. It's free to view.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Pia. There is a question here from Amukta to, and I think I'm just going to put it out to the panelists. What are the initial clues for dementia, and when could the early start of engagement? I'm not sure I understand
No,
that.
when do you start engaging them in all these activities? I think that's what she wants to know.
Yes, yes.
See, dementia, when we see it as a diagnosis of dementia, actually it has been there for the previous 7 to 8 years.
Right.
So mild cognitive impairment sets in. But the problem is distinguishing mild cognitive impairment from aging related memory difficulties is sometimes very tricky. So when there is mild cognitive impairment, there's nothing wrong in assuming that this may go on to a dementia, because many of them do. And you can start these engagements early. And like the nun study showed, that if you utilize the brain, utilize the body, do the physical activity, maintain good health, treat the diabetes, hypertension, stroke, whatever, make sure that the general health is also maintained, they may have Alzheimer's and never manifest it, which was actually one of the most fantastic findings of the nun study.
Right.
So if we are continuously engaging them early, we are keeping the brain going, despite the pathological changes that are going on underneath. So it's never too early to start, is my answer to that question.
Yeah. So I think we have pretty much come to the end of our session. I just want to ask the panel,
Hello?
are there any last words that you want to share with the audience before we
Hello, ma'am.
I think someone wants to ask a question.
I can't.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
You could hear me all.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, ma'am. This modern generations or this modern era is affecting this cognitions or something like that. Actually, I'm gonna say that this modern generations is affecting us to dementia or like that something.
No. Dementia, I don't think you should. True, stress and stroke and traumatic brain injury, all of these can predispose you to dementia. But I don't think dementia is caused by the modern lifestyle. If that's what you're... True, if your general health is damaged because of eating fatty food and being obese and diabetic and hypertension has a clear correlation. But I don't think you can link it directly the way you're saying. Ninga Tamila? Tamilla vana kelunga.
Ama, ma'am. Yes.
Ninga enna kettinga actually? Adana kettinga.
Yeah.
அதான் மேம் ஆக்சுவலா நான் கேட்டேன் இந்த மாடர்ன் ஜெனரேஷன் இந்த மாடர்ன் லைஃப் ஸ்டைல் வந்து
சரி ரைட் ஓகே ஐ திங்க் I've answered to the point then.
Yes ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
So I have another question here. Is forgetfulness a sign of oncoming dementia, like forgetting where I left my phone? I mean, I find that I do that sometimes. I take my sugar and I put it somewhere. I mean, are these things that we should be concerned about, or is it that the mind is so full of thoughts?
Exactly. We are all so mindful, not mindful. So we have to be a bit more mindful in our living. Our minds are just full.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. We had seen it earlier. We would have watched the whole thing. Anyway, Canada.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to end our beautiful panel discussion here. And I want to say a big thank you to Keith, Pia, and Dr. Pritika. It's been such an honor to have you on this panel discussion. And I tell you, I was very nervous. This is the first time I'm moderating a discussion completely on my own, and I don't know if I did a good job.
You did a great
But
job.
at the end of the day, it is to create a greater awareness, to share, to let people know that there is hope, you know. Get your paintbrushes, get your dancing shoes on, and get your Scrabble board, do your jigsaw puzzles, eat your blueberries. All these things are all signs of hope for us to move forward and live a full and healthy life, and it's all about living in a community and loving and caring for each other. I think that is the most important thing, right?
Just because cognitively we have deteriorated, we don't have to be unhappy before we go. There can be a lot of joy, there can be a lot of connection. And
Yes.
true, okay, you can't talk, you can't remember your relatives, all that's fine. But there's no need for
In some
misery
cases, that
and
might be a good thing.
unhappiness and depression. That
Yeah.
can be averted with all of these interventions. And that is
Right.
the biggest hope, I'll tell you, as a doctor and as a neurologist.
Yes.
It makes me think that, we didn't speak specifically about stigma. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but the tragedy of dementia is actually not dementia. The
Correct.
tragedy of dementia is the assumption that with dementia, there's a premature closure of life. And so if we can really challenge that and support people to live well, I think that, it's extremely important.
I think just to add to Pia's point as a close, I would say from the standpoint of the built environment, there's a wonderful book that I would offer to everyone to read. It's called Places in the Soul by Christopher Day. And in that book, he has a statement which really sort of talks about these contrasts of worlds, which eventually we have to think about where we're going to be in the next 10 years as older adults, and hopefully dementia does not befall us, but we also want to make sure that we can ensure that the generations who are responsible for the design of worlds would be sensitive to our perspectives. And in it, he says, in the contrast of worlds, the first place is a place of prayer and tranquility. And the second place is a place you can't wait to get out of. So let's make sure that it's a place of prayer and tranquility, of spirituality, and one that is sensitive to our being and our personhood, our identity, versus a place that we want to get out of. So I speak to the up and coming people that are going to be the designer of these worlds. Please think about those contrasts. Thank you for this, and thank you for inviting me to stand among giants in Prathika and Pia. So much appreciated.
Well,
I enjoyed it every moment, and your perspective was something totally new for me to think about. But that's why I remembered the Japan experiment, which is a good model actually.
So before we close off, there are some questions like, what are the preventative measures? Is forgetting a sign of dementia? I think we answered that. I think that's it. Please tap India team if you have the email addresses for all those who have registered. But all of you who are on as audience, you all know, most of you know either Tap India or know me. So if you have any questions, please send it to me, and I will connect with the panelists and get the answers to you. Okay, so I think that's it. We're going to say good night to the people in India, and have a wonderful Saturday to the folks here in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna.
She's ended, I think.
Sorry.
Hi, Beans, this is Cora here.
Hi, Cora.
I just logged in about a few minutes ago because I just saw it. So I missed the whole discussion. So is there a recording? Or,
yes, there will be a YouTube video that will be uploaded soon.
Okay. And just one question. Is signs of forgetting the start of dementia?
Well, it's one of the symptoms.
Forgetting faces, forgetting...
No, but it's part of normal aging also. So you have to, don't get too worked up And remember, like I said earlier, we all of us have got too much in our heads. So sometimes that itself can make you forget. And if you are diverted, distracted, you can be forgetful. So not all forgetfulness is an indication of dementia. And I would suggest you don't get too worked up.
No, I am not
forget
asking
here
for me. Actually, I'm asking for my husband. He asked the same question 10 times over. And after he's been told, he's still
Maybe he's
asking.
not paying attention when you're talking.
Maybe
Maybe as simple as
heard
that.
my voice too
It's
often.
very common, very, very common.
Yeah.
So you tell him something and then he'll again ask you the same thing and he'll ask you to show it
No,
to him
in
again.
future, just tell him, listen, I want to talk to you. Get his attention, look him in the eyes and tell him. And then see if he still asks, then you get him investigated.
So I think we should wrap up now. Everyone has a busy schedule. And Anya, I think the recording will be up. So I'm going to say bye to everyone. Thank you. Please watch out for our next conversation in mental health and the arts through TAP India, which will be probably in the new year. So thank you, panelists, Pia, Keith, and Dr. Pritika. Thank you, TAP India team. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. Good night and good morning, all in one. Bye now.
Good day to everybody. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Anna. Thank you, TAP.
Bye.